Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to welcome you. My name is Geraldine Blomberg from the Schwarzkopf Foundation, and I'm part of the events team here. And tonight we are hosting this digital event under the title How to Keep Europe's Competition Fair. And I'm more than excited to welcome our speaker tonight. Welcome, Margrethe Vestager, Executive Vice President of the European Commission and Commissioner for Competition. We really appreciate the time you give us tonight, considering your busy schedule. Thank you very much for this. And I'm also extremely pleased to welcome today's moderator. Welcome, Uri Batzecha. Uri was born in Mongolia. She currently is an economist at Positive Money Europe, so also located in Brussels currently, which is a not-for-profit research and campaigning organization that aims to make the money system support a fair, democratic and sustainable economy. Previously, Uri worked at the Bruegel think tank, the German Institute for Economic Research and the United Nations Development Programme. So her research interests include macroeconomics, banking, monetary policy and sustainable finance. Before I hand over in a second, here are some explanations about tonight's event. So Uri will take over in a second, but I wanted to give you a brief overview of what we're going to do tonight. After an introduction from her, we will hear a short input statement from Margrethe Vestager. Then Uri will open up the conversation with questions before we open it up to your questions. And you can hand in your questions via the Q&A box. So I think we have a German Zoom version. So this is the Fragen, Antworten, F&A box. And we're gonna play these questions to Uri. If you are more comfortable with handing in the questions in German, that's fine too. We're gonna translate them for her. And the event ends 7:15 the latest. Please note that the event tonight is recorded, and that's it already from my side. Herewith, I gladly hand over to you, Uri.
Thank you very much, Geraldine, for this very nice introduction. It's an honor and a privilege to have you here, Executive Vice President Vestager. I don't think our guest, my guest today, does not need a long introduction. However, I think it's always nice to hear and repeat one's achievements again. So she's the Executive Vice President of the European Commission in charge of the digital single market, and she's the Commissioner for Competition. Before that, she had a long and successful career in Danish politics. She was appointed as chair of her party at age 21. I think that's an inspiration for young women around the world to enter politics, despite any age. Then served as an education minister and minister for economy and internal affairs. And in 2014, she became the commissioner for competition, and in 2019, executive vice president of the European Commission. In her capacity as a competition commissioner, as you might all know and see in the media, she brought high-profile cases against household names that we hear often a lot, digital giants, Facebook, Amazon, Google. She's Europe's, well, perhaps world's most famous regulator and really one of the most powerful women in Europe. And among many things that you said and did, I think my favorite one is, I'm just gonna repeat this, the motives for breaching competition law are as old as Adam and Eve. It's about greed, fear, and when you combine that with power, you get a very poisonous cocktail. So with that, I will hand over the E-floor to you, Vice President.
Well, thank you very much for this introduction, and good evening, everyone. And thank you very much for the invitation, not only to speak and give an input, but also to hear your questions or your comments as to what we can do better. We live we live in very troubled times with war at the doorstep of Europe and the cost of living crisis, not to mention the ever-present climate emergency. So I think we all know competition, whether it is kicking the football along with friends or playing cards in the family. I think most of us enjoy games. And that's because competition is something very human. It hones our minds, it keeps us healthy, it makes us better at what we do. And the same is true for businesses. By competing, companies sort of train their business muscle to produce better quality products, reduce cost, reduce waste, deliver excellent services at the lowest possible price. And this doesn't just benefit consumers. In fact, it also benefits workers in companies. Some studies have shown that work satisfaction is higher in smaller firms and in sectors of the economy where market concentration is lower. And if you have high market concentration, you also have less competition. If you have low concentration of power, you have more competition. As everyone knows, playing football or playing cards, it only really works well if we all play by the same rules. If some make up their own rules or cheat, well, not much fun. And in the European Union, the rule book is the treaties, legislative acts, guidance, the case law coming from the courts. That is our rule book in total. And these rules have been developed over many decades to ensure that we have fair and efficient competition in this single market that is the European Union. First of all, for competition to be fair, the playing field must be level. It cannot be that one team is playing uphill and the other one is playing downhill. And our competition rules is there to make sure that this happens, that you have a level playing field so that you have a fair chance of making it, depending on your talent and your efforts. And that is what should define who wins the game. Not that some has the opportunity to play downhill, others almost always have to go uphill. And in order to help us do this, we have three instruments. One is what we call antitrust, second is merger control, and third is the control of state aid. So when governments hand out taxpayers' money to companies. But first things first, the first instrument, antitrust, is there to prevent that dominant players. And with the dominant player, I think of really powerful companies. They hold a lot of the markets. They have the market power to do things that really affect how the market works. So the point is that we should prevent that they abuse this powerful position. For example, through predatory pricing, which means that you set your prices artificially low to prevent that someone is coming into the market if they, for instance, cannot cover their costs. It can be other anti-competitive agreements, and the worst of those we consider are cartels. So an old school cartel would be, CEOs meeting, agreeing, you take the southern part of the market, I take the northern part of the market, and then all of a sudden not much choice is left for consumers, and they establish what you could say as a local monopoly. The second instrument is merger control, and here we make sure that when businesses merge or when one business acquire another business, that it doesn't lead to a lack of competition sort of down the road. Contrary to antitrust, that punishes illegal behavior after it has taken place, for instance, the Google cases where we give quite big fines for things that we think are illegal that happened in the past. Merger control gives us the power to block or to impose remedies on transactions that would harm consumers in the future. It's quite rare that we block a merger, because usually we find solutions so that the market will still be competitive. But this year, for example, we have vetoed 2 mergers. One merger between 2 major Korean shipbuilders. They were building LNG carriers. And we have also vetoed 1 merger between 2 companies called Illumina and Grail, who would have reduced the competition in the race for developing cancer detection tests. The third and final instrument that we have to help us is state aid control. And this is different to the other 2 and unique to Europe. You don't find this anywhere else. And the idea is that governments in one member state do not unlevel the playing field by giving subsidies to specific companies. But the core principle is the same. We want competition to be fair. Sometimes it can make a lot of sense to give a subsidy if it is transparent, if it doesn't unlevel the playing field. But if it does, well, then we're not really happy about it, also because it is taxpayers then picking up the cost of a company where other companies will have to pay their costs themselves. So the real losers, of course, is those who suffer from lack of competition, but also the taxpayers who would have to pay. But just one final consideration, because the thing is, as our world becomes more complex, so does our rulebook. It develops with the world that we live in. We cannot, use tools that are really old school, made ages ago. We need to make sure that they are modern and that they are sharp. And today we live in a digital age, and that, of course, creates completely different markets from what was known 20 years ago. And when large platforms can almost literally act as gatekeepers, so, keeping the gates, deciding who can get into the market and do business, and who will have to stay outside and never really to be discovered by customers, well, then they have enormous powers, because they decide over others, not even whether the playing field is level or not, but whether you can get into the playing field. But the thing is that with great power comes great responsibility. And that is why we passed a new regulation called the Digital Markets Act, to ensure that those companies who are this big, that they resume their responsibility to make the market fair and contestable. It was this piece of legislation was published in the official journal yesterday, and it's the first global sort of big tech regulation that we have. And many other rules or many other changes to European rules, they are in the digital sphere. We have a data strategy to create safe and secure data spaces. We have what we call a Data Act to promote that businesses share data. And with the Digital Services Act, we want to make sure that the internet is safer for citizens. For instance, to make sure that if you offer a service digitally, like Instagram, then you have to assess if there is a risk of these services being misused to undermine democracy, or if the services themselves put users at risk, for instance, for their mental health. And last but not least, the Artificial Intelligence Act will make sure that if artificial intelligence is used in situations where there is a risk of discrimination, that we then have a strong handle on the use of technology. For instance, if you apply for university or for another educational institution, that there is a human in the loop to make sure that it's not just an algorithm deciding whether you can be accepted or not. But Europe is not alone in the world, and sometimes businesses come here to buy other businesses and to do that with foreign subsidies. So we have developed a tool to look at that, to say, well, you cannot just come here and buy European businesses with, you know, a state budget helping you to do this. That is not fair, and that will unlevel the playing field. And just to come back to my initial metaphor, you know, in a little over a month, the World Cup begins. Germany and Denmark are in it both. If our teams do meet, it will not be until the semifinals. And of course, I will be hoping for a repeat of the European Cup final in 1992. Yeah, it's a long time ago, I realize that, but you know, you never stop hoping. But being a referee of competition policy, what I hope for most of all is fair play, level playing field, fair play, playing by the same rules, so that the best team wins. Thank you very much so far.
Thank you so much for this very educational, and in fact explained in very simple terms. I wish all complex ideas would be explained like this. You've already, I mean, in fact, your whole talk is about this. Perhaps this question is redundant, but given the title of our talk today, how to keep European competition fair, fairness seems to be at the very heart of what you do. And you've alluded to this, you've used metaphors on football. Fairness as a notion, or in fact unfairness, is a bit like, you kind of understand it, but how do you operationalize it? It's a bit of another thing. I just wanted to ask, where does your kind of personal sense of fairness come from, and how this notion is then operationalized in your institutional strategy and then translated in your day-to-day work?
Well, you know, it's I grew up, I think, in a very with a very privileged background. My parents, they were priests, both of them, so, you know, long education, quite well off. But I saw many people who did not have the same, you know, chance of making it, who found it difficult to get a level of skill so that they could get a job that would enable them to provide for themselves and start a family. I see a lot of women not being treated fairly, not having the same chances as men. I think a lot of minority do not have the same chance as those who belong to the majority. And you know, I simply think that we would have a much better society if we could be different, but treated in the same manner, having the same chances. And you know, it's sometimes difficult to translate an idea of fairness into sort of legal procedures of a competition case. But for instance, in the first Google case, what Google did was that they showed sort of their own shopping comparison service. You know, you can look for a product and then it will tell you where can you get it and what would be the prices. And the Google sort of shopping comparison tool was not the best tool, but yet they showed you this as the first one, and they only showed the competitors when it comes to providing this service of comparing prices on page 4 in search results. And for me, that is obviously unfair, because no one gets to page 4 in their search results. So you don't even have the choice of finding another one that the Google services to compare prices. So, and I think there are, you know, there's a lot of examples of this where the behavior is simply not what you would expect from a gigantic company where you'd say, well, oh, come on, how can you not give the little guy a chance actually to compete against you?
Right. I do agree that the kind of inequality of outcome is what we see because there is inequality of opportunities, really, and I do think it's quite unfair. I've never went beyond the Google search page 3, so 4, no. Coming back to now a bit more competition, just yesterday, as you said, the Digital Markets Act has become law and was published, and congratulations, it's a massive amount of work to you and your colleagues. But in a sense, a law is a law. So you have the intellectual framework, and then you have the implementation and the enforcement. So what kind of enforcement tools, you've alluded to it already, does the Commission have? And what does it, if you could give an example, what does it mean for kind of normal people? What does it entail for somebody walking out in the street, for example?
Yeah, well, thank you very much. And it means a lot to us because, as you say, it has been a lot of work. And now, you know, I think this is a beautiful text, if you like really complicated legal language. But so far we have changed nothing. Well, we have changed the debate. We may have changed the perception of what is right and wrong, but we have not changed the reality. And that is supposed to come within the next year or so. For instance, so that if you have a phone, that you don't have to do with just one app store. Maybe you're a gamer and you want an app store that is specific for games, saying this is what I want. I don't want this generalized app store. I want one that is specific for what I need. It could be parents who want to say, well, I'm happy that my child has a smartphone, but I want an app store that is curated with apps that are appropriate for the age group of my daughter. And that is actually not a given today, that you can carry a second app store. But in normal life, you know, it's absolutely a given. If you don't like one shop that you go into, you just go into the next one. So if that is making sort of our digital environment more like sort of our physical environment. A second example could be that if you are a small business owner, that you actually do get your own data, because also that is not a given today. That if you have your little shop on a digital marketplace, you don't necessarily get your own data, but your big competitor may have your data to compete against you, and that is also clearly unfair. And the example I gave before about promoting yourself and demoting your competitors, also that will be clearly forbidden. So quite a number of changes, which also means that they may not necessarily come easy. So of course we're looking very much forward to start enforcing and gearing up when it comes to staff and expertise to make sure that we can have real effect.
Oh, wow, that sounds great. I think you, I mean, you've obviously been very, very busy beyond the Digital Services Act, Digital Markets Act. There is also the Digital Services Act that's focused on content moderation, the Data Act focusing on data sharing, and there is the, excitingly, and I don't know much about it, but the Artificial Intelligence Act, and if passed, it would be the world's first Artificial Intelligence Act. And this all sounds very exciting, of course, that it's a sense of the future and something we can look forward to. But at the same time, with these great technological leaps there are lots of concerns that come with it, protecting privacy, for example. And we see in some countries, I wouldn't name, these smart technologies are used for mass surveillance. So this is obviously in breach of privacy and in breach of democracy. So how do you make sure that people's data is protected, privacy is protected, and people have the digital literacy to understand what they have and what kind of data they have and how they can use them?
Well, it is easier said than done, because actually
sure.
we do have rights. We have the right to our own data. We have the right to decide over our own data, with whom we want to share it. We have the right to be forgotten, so that our data is not just out there like forever. But what is still work in progress is to make sure that these rights that we have, that we can also enforce them. And here, it's not easily done, and it's really important that people in my position and as data protection officers, that we do our best, because I don't think it is fair just to ask each and every one of us to do the entire job ourselves, because the risk is that we get easily manipulated. For instance, if I want to set my own cookie rules, when I click, instead of just clicking accept, and I click I want to set my own rules, then the one who would just allow all my data to go, it's a nice green button. The thing I have to click in order to set my own rules is light gray and seems actually not really to be functioning. So, there are all these kind of games, and if ever one would take the time to start reading the terms and conditions that we all click accept to, this is also written in a way that I find to be, written to scare you away, because it's really long, it's really complicated, and really important. So I think we still have a bit a way to go before we can say every one of us are now empowered to make sure that we can use our rights. And the second thing is that in our proposal for regulating artificial intelligence, we have a suggestion that some uses of technology should be forbidden. So not the technology in itself, but the use of technology. For instance, that a government set up sort of social scoring system, that you get points and then the government can follow whether you have sufficient points to be accepted to university or to have a mortgage or whatever. We think that should be forbidden. And the second thing that we think should be forbidden is that you can be, you have sort of surveillance in public space based on your biometrics, so that you would always be identified no matter where you are in public space. We simply do not think that that should have a place in our union. But except for these very few use cases, then only when discrimination might be a risk, we say we should have a hands-on approach to these use cases. But other than that, go. I consider all the legislation that we do as sort of pro-innovation, because if businesses know the rules of the game, well, it's much easier than not really knowing if all of a sudden some politicians get attentive to what we're doing. Now we set the rules, and then off you go with great ideas, building companies.
Yeah, of course, we don't want to live in a dystopian future of, I don't know if you've seen, but there is a series called Black Mirror. And in a sense, in a fictionalized world, of course, in a sense, we have been warned. And speaking of the terms and conditions, I'm also the person who doesn't read all of this, of course, and just click accept. And tell people to do that when they ask me stuff. And when you talk about digital rights, that reminds me, you need to also have digital citizen responsibilities, even provided that these things are eligible, readable, and understandable. This is what you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And you know, I think in order to have rights, you should also enable people to use the rights. Of course, to some degree, you have an obligation to educate yourself and know what you're doing. But if it's really difficult, then what to do? So one of the things in these new pieces of legislation is to make sort of dark patterns forbidden. And dark patterns is sort of the negative nudging that make us do things that we would otherwise not do. And that, of course, is also to say to technology, we would like, to evacuate sort of part of our personal space, instead of getting so close to us that you can basically make us do more or less whatever that serves your business purpose. And I think that is important because, of course, you're right that Black Mirror gives a view in the future, but also the lockdown under the pandemic could give, I think, a negative view of the future. That's instead of being together, we do everything online. We work, we shop, we exercise, we socialize, we look at culture through a screen. And for me, that is a much more realistic dystopia than some of the sort of more advanced dystopias that we see, that we allow technology to eat up our time, so that we have very little time available actually to be with other people.
Yeah, definitely.
Or that we forget that a phone is actually something that you can use to talk with other people. Call your mother, call your friends if you haven't seen them for some time. And I think that is part of something that we need to keep reminding ourselves, that technology is to some degree addictive, and we need to make sure that we are ourselves in charge of how we want to spend the day.
Yeah, I think we probably had too much technology during the pandemic times, locked inside with our TV and Netflix and phones and all of that. You're completely right. And I want to bring up this point about gatekeepers. Now we're talking about the digital giants. So these are dominant players. And just to kind of give an idea to our audience, Google is 95% of European search engine. Facebook is 90% of social media. Netflix, Amazon, and HBO, and a few others represent 90% of Europe's streaming revenue. So these are obviously digital giants who have market monopoly. So in the existence of such kind of overwhelming dominance, there would kind of always be the desire to bend the rules. In this environment, to what extent it is possible to have European champions, so that you don't have to look into kind of the existing ones without some sort of state kind of support. After all, when we look at, of course, Europe does not exist in vacuum. As you said earlier, there are other jurisdictions. China and has been growing quite a lot in the last 20 years. You look at the Korean chaebols, US, and in terms of China and Korea, they've received years of state support and tax rebates and subsidies, and I don't think that's really a secret. Or US with its deep and abundant capital markets and somehow more lax regulation. To what extent can we have European big structures, and to what extent is it welcome? Is it possible to have these champions on one hand and have fair competition on the other?
Yeah, that is exactly the question that we've been asking ourselves. Because the thing is that what big tech is aiming at is to have us within what we say their own walled garden, so that you do everything the same place. You identify yourself, you look for things, you shop, you do, you work within the same environment. It could be Google, could whatever. And what we would want to achieve is that we can sort of put together our own digital space by multi-homing. So I can take one service from one provider and another service from another provider and a third service from a third provider, and there would be interoperability. Because then there would be much more competition between different service providers if we were capable of doing so. And one of the reasons why we would want to make sure that every European citizen has a digital identity is that then you can identify yourself like that instead of identifying yourself via your Google account or your Facebook account or your Apple account for that matter, because these are commercial identification, and they make sure that data travel. When you have your own identification, then it's only to identify you, it's not to make data travel. So this is a way to enable us to travel sort of outside of the walled gardens. And the second thing is that I think we failed, like 10 years ago, because we did not provide a real single market. We didn't enable as you say, a deep capital market with risk-willing capital. And then it's very difficult to grow a business. Because there has been, European startups that will want to do social media. But what we see now is that we have a much better functioning digital single market. We have better capital. And what happens now is that everything digitalizes. So agriculture, tractors will provide data with satellites as to how the farmer should do his farming. Transports, because you will digitalize how different transport modes come together. Health, because you have so much more data and measurements that will allow new treatment of people. And a lot of that is much more sort of industrial. It is business to business. And this is where Europe has a stronghold. Europe has an industrial culture. Europe has provided machinery for the entire planet for decades and decades and decades. And we should build on that. Of course, it's not easy. Nothing is easy. But we ought to be able to make much more out of this sort of next chapter of digitization when everything digitalizes, because it makes less and less sense to talk about the digital sector, because there are digital elements basically everywhere.
Right. I think we spoke quite a lot about crisis. You in fact started with quite a bit of crisis. So I would perhaps bring us to the very current crisis, is the energy crisis precipitated by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And related to that, German government said that they will have this 2 billion euro package to kind of shield businesses and households from rising energy prices, and also provide support to energy companies. At the same time, you very clearly defined what state aid rules are. It's not privileging one over another. It's not creating selective advantage. But in a sense, how big of a challenge is this? And what can the Commission do to ensure that the state aid is not selective, and in fact it is reaching the people who are most in need and who are most affected by the crisis?
And that is a very good point, because even though it's annoying for me to reprioritize to pay my bills, I can do it. But some people cannot do it. If their energy bill just keeps increasing and eat more and more of maybe a low budget, of course it should be prioritized to help them. And here we'd say, well, the recommendation from the Commission is to be targeted so that you can help the people most in need. And when it comes to helping households, we don't consider that state aid. We just say, go, go, go. This is important. Don't let anything hold you up to do this, because it's really crucial. Because you're literally in people's living room, whether they can stay warm over winter or not. The second thing is that the state aid rules, they are for everyone. They're in the treaty, everyone has signed up for this. And since we're in a crisis, we can be quite flexible. But of course, there is a limit to flexibility. First, those who should have have help should need the help. If you're perfectly fine, or your profit has diminished, but maybe not so much, so you can pay your bills, well, then you should not have help. Second, you should keep paying part of the increase of your bill yourself, also to have an incentive actually to economize with energy, gas or electricity, because we cannot solve this without being much more energy efficient. And last but not least, we'd say, well, there should be kind of a cap over how much aid can you get, in order to make sure that you have a incentive also to more long-term to make sure that your production methods are as effective as possible. And within sort of these very fundamental principles, we can do quite a lot. And we see that in member states, there is obviously quite a lot of appetite to help out businesses, in particular energy intensive businesses. The thing is, of course, and that cannot be solved with state aid rules, is that some countries are not as rich as others. And that is an ongoing discussion as to, well, what is the European perspective in this crisis, so that we do not end up in a situation where some businesses in some countries can get support, while other businesses as deserving in other countries cannot get support. What we saw during the pandemic was that we had the same imbalance in the beginning as to who could give support, but actually it turned out that the aid actually paid out was not as uneven, it was much more balanced. But of course, it's very difficult to say what would be the effect here, because the energy crisis is very, very different from the pandemic.
I wanted to ask you a bit on what you just said earlier, the last sentence. In a sense, how, in terms of crisis, how leniency is decided, and how lenient should, how lenient policy should be. And in a sense, during the pandemic crisis, there is unprecedented amount of money that was mobilized, 3.2 trillion by European governments since the onset of the pandemic to, in fact, May this year. So there are exemptions, and but how is these exemptions decided? What constitutes one crisis from another?
Well, what keeps me awake at night is not sort of how much aid is being paid out. What would keep me awake is if it's not under control, if it's not transparent how taxpayers' money are being used, if there are a perception that there are some rules for some that are not available to others, because these are exceptionally challenging times. The pandemic, we have never tried this before. Now the combination of the cost of living crisis, climate crisis, war on our doorstep, and then the energy market being turned against us. So something fundamental in how our societies work is being used as a weapon. Those things have never happened before. So I think that should be reflected in how we approach this, as long as we still rely on the fundamental principles that You should need aid if you get it. You should pay part of your bill yourself to have an incentive to economize, and eventually there should be a cap. And then we need to figure out and keep discussing what would be the European response if member states would want such a response. We had that to help us recover from the pandemic in the next generation EU facility, which was a gigantic loan that we for the first time has taken together. But whether or not we will reach to a European facility for this, that very much depends on the willingness among member states.
Yeah, you're right. And I think transparency and targeting is critical, given the fact that almost 30 million people living in energy poverty, and probably it's going to get worse this winter. Already last winter was quite challenging to look at the bill. To kind of, as long as we're talking about crisis, I'm sorry to do this, but I think we cannot escape talking about the climate crisis, and also a lot of young people that's in their mind, that's kind of their future and their children's future. So you said about the single market that there are 4 freedoms: the freedom of movement, goods, capital, and people. Data, probably there should be 5. And we are about to reach, or perhaps starting to embark on this great transformation to reach net zero by 2050, to meet the goals of the Paris climate agreement. And in that case, there's this foundation that is on this movement of capital, goods, and people. It will be fundamentally tested yet again whether there is a solid foundation, so that we can do green industrial strategy, green job strategy, green financing strategy. And so in doing this, I think it's inevitable that we need to provide support for green technology and green firms for them to gain competitive advantage. In that case, how compatible can it be, and how effective can it be? I mean, the kind of fundamental question that I'm trying to reach is, in this great transformation, how do you keep markets fair?
Well, I think we should talk about the climate urgency all the time.
Oh, I agree.
because it would be a giant problem if we, confronted with war and the energy crisis, put the climate emergency on the back burner. Because we're not anywhere close to having solved it. You know, I think last year was the highest ever emissions. In Siberia, they had the warmest summer in 7,000 years. So, you know, we need to keep it absolutely top of mind. The thing is that it's thought-provoking that with the energy crisis, all of a sudden in a number of member states, you know, the use of energy could be diminished with 10 to 15%.
Yes.
So I think it's quite clear that we have not been bold enough when it comes to actually making the price mechanism work, because we could save much more. I think for the last 20 years, it has been a good idea to have a heat pump, but only now people say, I really need a heat pump. So we are trying to make this a situation where we can accelerate the green transition. Right now, of course, more sort of old school energy producing facilities are kept in production, but we have proposed what we call Repower EU, which is there in order to accelerate that we can build wind farms, solar panels, you know, everything that comes with that. And we're also, you know, pushing forward with circularity in order to have, you know, real markets for the reuse of resources, because we are still not there, and a lot of precious materials, they still go to waste. And last but not least, of course, here competition is sort of a subcontractor. It's not the main tool, but we also say, well, if you want to make agreements among businesses that have obvious green targets, then come and talk to us, so that we do not see a cartel in green disguise, but real green efforts. Because I think we can do something too. And then, of course, we have made new rules for state to support all kinds of greening, also greening of companies like, you know, steel factories, that they can get into other kinds of energy use. So, you know, we try to push wherever we can, because the acceleration of the green transition is absolutely needed in the situation that we're in.
Oh, for sure. And I think it's very important to have in mind that this will be fair, and that, you know, these greenwashing scandals will not lead to people getting disillusioned and not believing that this transition will happen, etc. So it's also a role for you to keep that, to have the greenwashing at bay and to enforce full level playing field in this.
Yes, and I think you have another very good point here, because I don't think that we can manage the green transition if it's not perceived as being fair.
Yep.
If some say, well, it's only me who should bear the costs of this green transition, I also want the benefits of having a wind farm in my backyard. When it turns, it should also be money in my pocket, and not just some big energy company. So I think we can do more to be much more inclusive in how things are done, because fighting climate change is an amazing transition, because it's both sort of the systemic changes in changing our energy system, in changing all the flows of resources, but it's also the changes that we can do, every one of us, and in our families and in our communities. And that is one of the things I find really fascinating, that this is not just something where you can look at some politicians and say you haven't done your job, but you can do that, but at the same time saying, but I'm also doing my best. And then that there is a possibility of empowerment rather than inclusion, rather than exclusion, when it comes to fight climate change. And I think we could be much more on the offensive in using those mechanisms to create better societies.
Definitely. And I do think I'm using my dominant position here as the moderator to asking my questions. I would ask this question that came through the chat. Somebody posted. And they ask, but can it not also be a good thing to have all your things, data in one place? What if there is the diversity of the EU is aiming to reach, but its individual services from different companies are not compatible? What could the EU do to make companies cooperate?
Well, the point is, of course, that if you would want to have everything in the same place, then that should be your choice, and not something that you are more or less forced to do, because others may have another preference. They might want to do something else. They might say, well, I like this search engine, but I like this browser much more, so I want to combine the two. And this is why we are pushing sort of the interoperability, that things can actually go together instead of being adversaries. But it's not for me to decide how you would want to organize your digital life, but it's for me to make sure that there is some sense of choice as to how you can organize your digital life.
I think that's there is another question that says, what does fair mean in the context of global competition?
Yeah, you know, there are really many dimensions to that. If you look at some of the more recent trade deals, here we would, in order to agree on trading with another country, if they don't have signed up for workers' rights, we'd say, well, then we can make no trade deal with you. There are this international labor organization, ILO. They have a number of conventions to give workers' rights. And we say, well, this is an element of fairness in doing trade, that people are not being exploited, that they have to work without any rights. Fairness could also be to say, well, we would want to trade with you, but we don't want to buy products that are produced by taking down rainforest. That is sort of an environmental, nature-prone sense of fairness. So I think that there are elements where we can say, well, this will actually be better than what it was before. And this is, of course, step by step, because I don't think that it changes the fact that we live in a world that is really unfair. Because many people, they have living conditions which are extremely poor. So it is work in progress, but we're very far from a fair world for every citizen living on this planet.
Yeah, definitely, and the kind of repeated crisis and the brunt of the climate crisis and the economic crisis is borne by the poorest and the weakest in our societies globally. There is one question, I think you'll have a great answer, I'm sure. It says competition in economic processes, in fact, another question, seems so difficult to understand to non-experts. I mean, for somebody for the young person sitting in Berlin, let's say, Brussels seems so far away. And on top of that, European Commission for Competition seems so complex to understand. And so how do you bridge this gap? How do you make it understandable? How do you make competition policy sexy, I would say?
Yeah, but maybe competition policy is a bit of an acquired taste. So I don't think everyone needs to know every detail if they can enjoy the outcome, that you actually have choice in the market. And a lot of things are dealt with national competition authorities. So in Germany, the Bundeskartellamt. And in my own country as well, for instance, in my country, they have started looking into why butter has become so expensive, because it's much more expensive than what the already high level of inflation would give you. So say, something is wrong here. And that is, we all have the same sort of set of rules, but the national competition authorities, they would look for things in the national market, like food, like retail, quite a number of things. And I would have a responsibility when it's 3 member states or more, or pan-European. It's maybe I felt a bit like you when I came into this position, because I'm an economist by training, and I've been a politician for many years. And starting to work with lawyers, I thought, you have competition law, and then you have quantum theory, and it's complicated. I don't really know. But then, of course, you dig in and you learn more, as it is with most things. You can look at the results, but if you get passionate about it, then you want to dig in and know every detail. But I don't think everyone needs to be passionate about competition policy, but they should be passionate about having choice and having fairness in the market. And that just, now I get myself all excited, but for instance, such a thing as tax fairness. Most businesses, they work really hard to make a profit, and from that profit they pay their taxes. Other businesses, they get themselves organized so that even though they have huge profits, they pay very little, if anything, in taxes. And that is something I think that has also a bit to do with competition. If some companies get sort of a selective advantage by a member state where they are headquartered.
Mhm.
So here, for me, you know, if you want to be a competition lawyer, that would make me happy because I think it's a great job to have. But if you don't want to be a competition lawyer, I do hope that living in a society that is fair is something that you think is actually a good thing, a good characteristic of your society.
Definitely. And a very important question, is butter an essential ingredient in Danish cooking? That's yeah, no, that's very interesting. I think related to this, and given that our audience is quite young people today, how do we, I mean, these young people seem to be, I mean, starting from the financial crisis, then there was the Eurozone crisis with an insane level of unemployment. Then we had the pandemic, then now energy crisis and the ongoing, I mean, the war and the climate crisis. It's very easy to get disillusioned and lose trust in the system. And especially given the fact that from time to time, you keep hearing this tax evasion stories, and then, this Panama paper leaks every few years. And in this kind of environment, some people tend to go back to themselves and disengage from society and become cynical and lose trust and lose the sense of fairness. So how do we inspire kind of young people to actually stand up and say, you can be, I mean, you should be a part of this, not only in domestic politics, but actually in European politics that you are in?
Well, of course, you're right to say that there are so many things that are bad and getting worse, but there are also things that are getting better. I think that the climate for future movement, all the many young people who have been hitting the streets in previous years, have inspired sort of all that green legislation that we are passing for our society to be circular, for Europe to be carbon neutral. All of that comes from that engagement. Tax rules are being changed both globally and in member states. That comes from people saying, this cannot be true, this is not fair, we need change. And I think that cynicism is a really dangerous disease or mental state, because I think it prevents you from engaging basically with life. Mm. And I'd rather be disappointed after having engaged than not engaging at all, because I think even though things doesn't go fully as I would want them to go, I still think that you move other people a bit every time you engage. You move yourself, you learn every time you engage. And I think it's important to look for those experiences rather than to be disappointed and say, well, I didn't get what I want, so I don't want anything at all. Because it's an engaged world that changes.
Yeah, and I do think people have the tools to do so through digital domain as well. There is one question, I guess, from a young person as well. Young people in Germany are very open to publishing their personal data or even information. Data protection is not a problem for many. They see no problem here. How does carelessness be counteracted?
Well, sometimes I say that you should imagine that, well, of course you want to tell your mother everything, but do you want to be with her all the time? Because that is basically what you're doing. You're always having someone watch over you. So no matter if you think you have something to hide or not having something to hide, do you want someone to watch over you all the time? for me, you know, it has really developed into, you know, I really care about sort of the integrity of my personal space, so that I decide when to share and when not to share. Because in a lot of circumstances, I would love to share, but I just want to take the decisions myself.
Exactly. I think this one question also goes towards what we've been discussing about engagement, the idea of Europe, actually for the whole duration of this talk. Somebody asks, what does Europe mean to you? And how does your personal ideal European Union look like in the future?
Well, for me, Europe is home. You know, I have privilege of traveling a lot outside of Europe. And then I see it very strongly what we have together. When in Europe, sometimes, you know, there's quite a difference between a Dane and someone from Spain and someone from Bulgaria. But seen from the outside, I think we are much more similar than we think. And I would want us to do more things together. I think sometimes we are too reluctant to engage with others, and I think that weakens us. Because Europe is a great place to live, in particular if you're a woman. So we could do more together. We could do more when it comes to, you know, foreign policy, having a bigger influence in the world around us. We could be more bold when it comes to enabling other people to have their rights. So, you know, I think for me, considering Europe, you know, my home, a place where I really like to be, I think that home could be a more inclusive place and a better place to live if we did more things together.
Yeah, definitely. And as a young woman, also an immigrant, I do say that I'm starting to feel at home more and more. Yes, I would like to thank you. I think we need to finish now so that you can go on your next travel and not to take too long of your evening after work. So thank you so much for engaging with us and answering all of these questions. It was a pleasure again and a privilege to speak to you.
Well, thank you. I think that it has been indeed a pleasure to have this conversation. Both with the questions from the audience, but indeed also with you guiding us through the mysteries of competition policy and what the market, how the market works. So thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you.
Of course, I have to step in and thank you both as well. Madam Vice President, I really enjoyed your input and your thoughts, how you shared them. So thank you very much. And also thank you, Yuri, for your fond moderation. I was actually pretty amazed how relatable you managed to talk about competition. And I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Yeah, I've also thought the questions were pretty interesting. And I wish all of us a really good evening and hope to see you soon. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Have a good
Bye.
night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.